Welcome to the Podkey summary of Elevate Your App's Text Experience with TextKit from WWDC 2026. A lot of text editing on Apple platforms has always come down to a trade-off. Take the convenience of the built-in text views, or build your own thing if you need real control. What's interesting here is that Apple is opening up more of TextKit's internal machinery, so developers can keep a standard UITextView or NSTextView and still customize how text is laid out, drawn, and synced across views. That matters for everything from line numbers and collapsible sections to faster handling of big documents and better SwiftUI integration. For years, the easy path was using something like UITextView, NSTextView, or SwiftUI's text editor and getting a whole bundle of behavior for free. You get text input, selection, undo, dictation, all the stuff users expect, and you don't have to spend your week rebuilding an editor from scratch. The downside was always control. If you wanted to manage storage differently, customize layout deeply, or do smarter viewport-based rendering, you usually had to step outside the ready-made view and build on TextKit yourself. Apple's new direction is basically trying to remove that hard either-or choice. The framework text views now expose more of the underlying layers, so you can keep a lot of the built-in behavior and still hook into the interesting parts. The cleanest way to understand this is the 4-layer architecture in TextKit. At the bottom is NSTextView content storage, which is the raw text model. Then there's NSTextView Layout Manager, which figures out glyph metrics and creates layout fragments. After that comes NSTextView Viewport Layout Controller, which decides which fragments actually intersect the visible viewport. And finally, there's the view layer, meaning the UI view, NS view, or even a CA layer that actually draws what the user sees. Those layers are immutable and separated on purpose, which makes the system a lot more reusable. Because the storage, layout, and viewport pieces are shared across UIKit, AppKit, and SwiftUI, you can keep the same text model and behavior while rendering it in different UI frameworks. That's the kind of detail that sounds abstract until you realize it means less duplicated editor logic and more consistent behavior everywhere. One of the more practical additions lands in the 2027 releases, where UITextView and NSTextView conform to NSTextView Viewport Layout Controller, delegate. That gives subclasses callbacks around each viewport layout pass, including will layout, configure rendering surface, and did layout. In plain language, your text view can now react right when layout is happening during scrolling or editing, instead of guessing after the fact. That opens the door to collecting geometry for visible paragraphs, tracking where fragments land, and layering on custom UI without replacing the layout engine. So if all you wanted was one missing feature, you no longer have to respond by accidentally writing half a word processor. There's also a new abstraction called NSTextView Viewport Rendering Surface. It treats any drawable visual element, whether that's a UI view, NS view, or CA layer, as a rendering target for layout fragments. Alongside that is NSTextView Viewport Rendering Surface Key, which lets the app associate fragments with reusable surfaces. That's a nice performance story for large documents, because instead of constantly creating brand new views as content scrolls in and out, you can cache and recycle them. Less churn, less overhead, and generally fewer moments where your editor starts feeling like it's wading through syrup. Another useful piece is shared content storage. Multiple text layout managers can attach to the same NSTextView content storage, which means several views can display the same underlying document at once. Edit in one place, and the changes automatically propagate to the others. That's especially handy for setups like an editor pane and a preview pane, or any app that wants different presentations of the same text without inventing its own sync layer. No manual diffing, no observer spaghetti, just one source of truth feeding multiple layouts. The line number example is a good illustration of how these new hooks help in real apps. A UITextView subclass can use the viewport delegate callbacks to collect the bounds of each visible NSTextView layout fragment and pass that information to a separate container view that draws the line numbers. because it's driven by the viewport. The numbers stay aligned while scrolling, editing, and changing selection, and takes a lot less custom plumbing than it used to. Collapsible sections work in a similar spirit, but one layer lower. If you implement NSText content storage delegate and it should enumerate method, you can mark certain NSText elements, like paragraphs, as collapsed. So, the layout manager never allocates fragments for them. That means you can build something like a tappable recipe heading that folds away the ingredient list underneath, while still using a standard text view. It's a neat reminder that sometimes the best performance optimization is just not laying out what nobody can see. Apple is also tightening up attachment behavior. A new UITextView registration method lets apps choose reuse policies for custom NSTextView attachment view provider subclasses. One policy preserves the provider across edits to inline paragraphs, which helps avoid things like animation resets. Another caches the attachment's rendering surface when it scrolls out of the viewport and restores it when it comes back, which is especially useful for inline media like animated stickers. And if your app lives in SwiftUI, none of this is off limits. You can wrap a UITextView or NSTextView in UIView representable or NSView representable, create the native view in MakeUIView or MakeNSView, and forward updates from SwiftUI. So SwiftUI keeps its declarative shell, and TextKit still does the heavy lifting underneath. The big picture is that Apple seems to be making tech systems less all or nothing. You can keep the convenience of the standard views, reach into the lower layers when you need to, and build richer editors without throwing away the framework's built-in strengths. For anyone who's ever needed line numbers, sync panes, or a collapsing outline in a text editor, that's a pretty welcome change. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.